In a small village nestled between two gentle hills, where the mornings smelled of damp earth and the evenings burned gold across the wheat, there lived an old man named Elias. Elias was 73 years old. His hands were thick with calluses, his back bent like a willow branch after many storms, and his eyes, deep brown, quiet, and kind, carried the kind of peace that only comes from a life fully lived. He owned a modest piece of land on the eastern edge of the village. His field was not large. It grew enough corn and vegetables for himself and a little extra to share at the weekly market. Next to his land lived a younger man named Tariq. Tariq was 35, strong, ambitious, and proud. He had inherited a larger field from his father and dreamed of turning it into the most productive farm in the valley. But Tariq had a problem, a deep, invisible one. He was bitter. He resented that his crops grew slower than he expected. He resented the merchants who paid low prices. He resented the weather, the soil, and sometimes, quietly, he even resented old Elias, whose smaller field always looked neat and alive while his own felt like a constant struggle. One summer, a drought settled over the valley like a heavy blanket. The river ran low. The village well could barely serve everyone. Farmers rationed their water carefully, measuring it out the way poor men count coins, slowly, painfully, with great anxiety. Tariq's field began to dry. The edges of his crops curled like burnt paper. He worked himself ragged, carrying bucket after bucket from the well, but it was never enough. One evening, exhausted and defeated, he sat at the edge of his land and put his face in his hands. He did not notice that old Elias was watching from his side of the fence. The next morning, before the sun had fully risen, Tariq woke to a strange sound, the gentle splash of water. He stepped outside, half asleep, and rubbed his eyes. There was Elias, moving slowly along the edge of Tariq's field, carefully pouring water from two heavy clay pots into the dry irrigation channels that ran along the border of his crops. Tariq stared. "Old man," he called out, his voice rough with confusion. "What are you doing?" Elias looked up, smiled calmly, and said, "Watering." "I can see that," Tariq said, walking closer. "But, that's my field." "Why are you watering my field?" The old man set one of the pots down, straightened his back slowly, and looked at the young man with those quiet, steady eyes. "Because it needs water," he said simply. Tariq blinked. He looked at the wet soil, then back at the old man. "But you have your own field to worry about. The drought is hitting everyone. You should be saving your water. Why would you waste it on me?" Elias was quiet for a moment. He looked out over the fields, both of them, his small, tidy plot and Tariq's larger, struggling land. "Tariq," he said at last, "I have lived long enough to learn one thing clearly. A man who only waters his own field will eventually stand alone in a desert of his own making." Tariq crossed his arms. "That sounds like something old people say to avoid giving a straight answer." Elias chuckled, a warm, unhurried sound. "Then let me give you a straight answer. 40 years ago, when I first came to this village, I had nothing. My crops failed in the second season. I was ready to leave, to give up, to tell myself that farming was not for me and that life had cheated me. And then my neighbor, an old woman named Hannah, came to my field at dawn, just like I am here now, and she watered my dying rose without being asked, without expecting anything in return." He paused, looking down at the soil. "I asked her why. She said something I never forgot. She said, because when your field grows, the whole village eats better. Your victory is not separate from mine." Tariq said nothing. Something in the old man's words had landed somewhere deep in his chest, in a place he had not visited in a long time. Elias continued coming back, morning after morning, for 2 weeks. He did not do it every day, only when his own supply allowed. Some mornings he brought water. Other mornings he brought seeds that had a better chance of surviving the dry spell. Once, he simply came and knelt beside Tariq's irrigation channel with a small tool and repaired a crack that had been leaking water away silently for days, water that Tariq had been carrying on his back and losing without even knowing it. Tarek began to watch the old man differently. He noticed that Elias never complained. He noticed that despite the drought, despite his age, despite how slow and difficult each step was, the men moved through each morning with a kind of purpose. Not urgency. Not panic. Purpose. As though every small act, every drop of water placed in the right channel, every repaired crack, every seed set into dry ground, was a prayer. One afternoon, Tarek walked over to Elias's field and stood at the fence. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "You already are," Elias replied, smiling without looking up from his work. "Don't you ever get tired of giving? Don't you ever feel like people don't deserve what you offer them?" Elias stood and looked at Tarek for a long moment. "Of course," he said. "I am human. There are mornings I wake up and think, why should I carry this heavy pot across a field that is not mine? Why should I repair a crack that someone else should have caught? Why should I give when I am also struggling?" He walked slowly to the fence and leaned against it. "But then I ask myself a different question. I ask, what kind of man do I want to be? Not what does this person deserve? Not what will I get back? Just, who am I choosing to be, right now, in this moment?" Tarek was quiet. "That answer," Elias continued, "is the only water that never runs dry." The rains finally came in late August. The valley turned green again. The river filled. The well recovered. And when the harvest season arrived, something remarkable happened. Tarek's field, the one that had been on the edge of ruin, produced one of its best yields in years. The repairs to the irrigation channel, the extra water during the critical weeks, the seeds better suited to dry spells, all of it had quietly worked beneath the surface. But more than the harvest, something else had changed in Tarek. He found himself waking earlier. He found himself looking at his neighbors, the widow 2 plots over, the young couple who had just started farming for the first time, and instead of measuring what they had against what he had, he began asking a different question. What do they need? And what do I have to offer? He brought extra seeds to the young couple. He helped the widow repair her fence before the autumn winds came. Small things. Quiet things. Things that no one announced or celebrated. And every time, in the giving, he felt something that he had been chasing for years without knowing it, not success, not recognition, but the deep, settled feeling of being useful. Of mattering. Of being woven into something larger than himself. Elias passed away the following spring, quietly, in his sleep, on a morning when the birds were just beginning their early noise and the light was still pale blue over the hills. The whole village came to his field. People brought flowers. People brought food. People told stories, so many stories, of small, unremarkable things Elias had done for them over the years. A fence repaired. A tool loaned. A word offered at exactly the right moment. Nobody had a story of something grand. Every story was small. But together, they were enormous. Tarek stood at the edge of that field and looked out at the soil, Elias's neat, quiet, cared-for soil, and he understood. This is what a life looks like when it is spent well. Not in achievements measured by size. Not in wealth counted in coins. But in the invisible network of small kindnesses that hold a community together the way roots hold the earth in place, unseen, unsung, and absolutely essential. The lesson is this. You do not water your neighbor's field because they deserve it. You do not give because you will be repaid. You give because you have decided, firmly, quietly, and every single day, what kind of person you are going to be. Generosity is not weakness. It is the highest form of strength. It is the choice to remain human in a world that is constantly asking you to be otherwise. Water your neighbor's field. Not because it is easy. Not because it makes sense. But because somewhere, a long time ago, someone watered yours, and it is now your turn to pass that forward. That is the only harvest that never ends.